But I first visited the United States in 1950, and I have been coming back over the years, teaching occasionally and whatnot for a long time.
What are a couple of the jobs you've had in your life?
Well, my first identification was with the United Nations. Afterwards, after my retirement from that, I was here teaching at New York University as Albert Schweitzer Professor of Humanities in the late 50s, and then have been back in various teaching capacities normally for some years, and hope to come back occasionally.
But you've held elective office too.
I have, yes. I was first of all a member of our Parliament in Ireland for 8 years, and then for 4 years as a member of the government as Minister for Communications. And after I retired from that, my life since then has been writing for newspapers, teaching, writing books.
Where was Edmund Burke from originally?
Edmund Burke was from Ireland, Irish-born, brought up entirely, made his career in the British Parliament, where he played a large part in ending the discrimination against Catholics in Ireland, which existed throughout his life. He himself was mainly Catholic in his origins, but brought up as a member of the Church of Ireland, which is the same as Church of England, which is Episcopalian. Very complicated.
When did he live?
1729 to 1795.
Did Thomas Jefferson know him at all?
I can't find that Thomas Jefferson ever actually knew him. The only American revolutionary with whom he was in close terms was Benjamin Franklin, when Benjamin was domiciled in Britain. They did know one another very well, respected one another, and felt kind of pulled apart by the incipient stages of the American Revolution, which neither of them, not even Franklin at that stage, wished to see. They didn't wish to see a break between Britain and America, but they were seeing it. The last hope, really, that Burke had in the whole thing was when he offered to go to Paris to meet Franklin. But his own party leaders in the House of Commons said, hey, that's too hot stuff, we can't have that.
What would you describe as Burke's philosophy?
Ordered freedom. Ordered freedom. Freedom was very, very important for him. But he thought that freedom, unless it could be combined with order, would not work. That's not a terribly original idea, and it was one shared by him and most of the American revolutionaries, not Jefferson. Jefferson is an unrestricted freedom person. Freedom is a pure, holy principle, and you just get out there and follow it and all will be well. That was not Burke, and the division between them begins with the earlier stages of the French Revolution.
If Edmund Burke were in America and a politician today, where would he fit in our political spectrum?
I don't think he'd fit too easily. I really don't. But the general, I'd say the general American setup would appeal to him well enough. There's a lot of freedom, a lot of continuity, a lot of law, all things that meant a great deal to Burke. So he'd be happy enough with the system, but I certainly wouldn't say he's out there rooting for either of the candidates in the present election. I think he would have considerable doubts about both of them, but not about the general system. I think the general system would be one for which he would still have an awful lot of time. It's basically what the general principles are those which he stood for.
Where do you fit?
Near enough to that. I would regard myself as a Burkean. Certainly a friend to this country, not uncritically in relation to its institutions, but seeing if this country were to collapse, which I think is unlikely, but which could happen perhaps in the second half of the next century. It's not impossible. I think democracy and liberalism everywhere in the world would go down. I had a debate not long ago with Helmut Schmidt when I put that, the former German leader, and I put that to him, and I found that he agreed without hesitation. Of course, democracy in Germany would not survive if it collapsed in the United States. And this was quite casual, like that. I kind of inhaled a bit on that one.
Why do you think it could collapse in this country in the second half of the next century?
Well, great and growing problems, poverty, race, language, possible inability to transfer the general value systems of what has been the American society to huge sections, racially defined, of the new and growing population. I don't know. Personally, I don't believe it will collapse. I think it has great internal strengths. And as I say, I think the future of democracy on this planet depends on the survival of this society, however amended and whatnot. The amendments are not that important, but the central spirit of the thing is very important.
Let me go to your book and go to the appendix first.
Okay.
You know what I'm going to ask you about? Madison Hemings' story.
Yes.
Why did you consider this a necessary appendix, separate item?
First of all, I believe the story. What Madison Hemings is telling us is that his mother told him that Thomas Jefferson was his father and the father of 4 of his siblings. And it's quite a detailed story. Madison Hemings tells it unemotively, plainly, seriously. And I don't think it has ever been discredited. And at one time, the, if you like, orthodox Jeffersonians did attempt to discredit it, using very disparaging language about Madison Hemings, which seems to have no justification at all. I believe the story. It seems to me to fit the rest of the picture as I've seen it. But it's certainly not proved. I tried to find out whether it could be proved by modern genetic testing. And what I learned after a lot of consultations with quite important figures in that area here was it can't be proved or disproved now, but improved methods of testing within the next 20, 25 years perhaps will demonstrate one way or the other whether Thomas was Madison's father. I believe he was.
Who named Madison Hemings?
We don't know. I think Madison Hemings, if I remember rightly, says himself that Dolly Madison suggested the name, which seems a bit odd, but maybe she did. She was a rather strange person.
And you say that Sally Hemings was related to Thomas Jefferson's deceased wife?
That's right, yes, that's right.
Go back first and how long was Thomas Jefferson married to Martha Jefferson?
Oh, I think it was quite short. I think it was only about 4 or 5 years. I'm a bit vague on it because it's outside my period, which is the French Revolutionary period, and that was a little earlier, before he comes on for me on stage. But it's about 5 years.
When did the whole story about Sally Hemings, a slave that he owned, come to light?
It was first published, I think, and I'm speaking now from memory, circa 1800, during his presidency, by a very scurrilous journalist called Callender, who had been employed by Thomas Jefferson on various political errands before that, and felt himself ill-rewarded and produced the story. That's when it's first published.
And what's the relevance of the Madison Hemings story? And by the way, where did you find that?
I can't give the citation immediately. It is to be found in the book. I do cite the
well, one of the things I know is that you found it
but
in
it comes,
Pike County Republican.
That's right.
In Ohio.
It's published after the Civil War, yes.
And what's the relevance, though, to your whole story here, the whole the slave relationship?
The relevance is this, that Thomas Jefferson, by reason of his situation as the great apostle of freedom and an owner of slaves, right to the end, was, in virtue of that, caught in a very large paradox. You could say, okay, the same applied to George Washington, for example, who also owned slaves. But Washington was not, if you like, an ideologue. He didn't dwell on the principles and so on. But he did emancipate all his slaves at his death, which Jefferson did not do. He only emancipated 5 who were probably his own children.
Madison Hemings being one.
Yes, that's right. So there is that difference. He was, I think, I argue in the book, that he was considerably tormented by the great paradox and grappled with it in various ways throughout his life, which is essentially what the book is about.
What do you really think of Thomas Jefferson?
I admire the immense capacities of the man, which included a great political capacity, an immense talent for molding the processes of his time in the ways that made him the 3rd President of the United States and made his party the heirs to that for generations up to the Civil War. Enormous talents, enormous resourcefulness, politically, and of course also the great, intellectually, the great framework which he had, so that he could, when things went bad for him, as they did when he left Washington's first administration, he could retire and devote himself to intellectual pursuits and farming with the kind of ease and grace which most politicians can't obtain if they're not in office. And then coming back, seeing the first opportunities, cultivating that, playing it extremely well throughout his career. I have a lot of detail on that. An admiration for his capacities. I don't warm to him as a human being. I do not, and I can't say that I do.
Why not?
Very cold and very false in everything he says about race. Everything is calculated. Everything is false. The things he says against slavery are aimed at other white people, particularly in the North, to establish, to distance him from the taint of slavery, but without ever giving up on slavery. And then the page after page of insinuations about the inferiority of black people, combined with an air of unwillingness to say such things, but he is forced to say them because, etc. And, you know, culminating in awful racist stuff about the supposed affection of monkeys for black women and so on and so forth. Yards of it in thoughts and notes on slavery. You know, there is something which I find most repugnant in that part of Jefferson which touches on the suppressed black population of the period.
You suggest that some of the Jefferson scholars avoid this area.
Yes. The most detailed investigation of Jefferson's career is Dumas Malone's 6 volumes.
The former University of Virginia professor.
That's right.
Deceased.
Yes, that's right. Deceased. And who for certainly more than a generation, dominated Jeffersonian scholarship. And he played down all the stuff in relation to blacks. He played up. He was one of the first people to leave out what Jefferson actually said about what would have to be done with the slaves once they were emancipated. That's altogether left out of his book. And that was part of it. It's still a valuable document, but it needs to be handled with great care.
This is not about, what I'm bringing up is not about the French Revolution. I want to get back to that in a moment.
Sure.
But struck me on in the epilogue on page 306.
Yes.
And it's a little bit complicated when I ask our director to roll tape, because
yes.
we're going to look at some videotape that Inez
yes.
Perez, one of our camera people, shot. And this was shot this morning, as a matter of fact. You can look over there on the screen.
Yes.
On this fall day, you can see the Jefferson Memorial.
Oh,
why did you talk about the Jefferson Memorial in here?
Well, the cult of Jefferson is important. It is important in American history and American society, and it reached its apogee under FDR.
This is a plaque that shows the groundbreaking ceremony of FDR back in '39, and it was dedicated in 1943.
That's right.
But there's some language coming up inside. You'll see the statue of Jefferson in just a moment. That is on the side of the memorial internally, and you put the language in their book. Mm-hmm. It's off here to the left, and we'll read it because this, as you say in here, has some significance to you.
Yes.
If you look up at top, it says, "God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. Commerce between master and slave is despotism. Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than that these people are to be free." And you say something's missing here. Something's awry when you look at this. What is it?
Yes, because Jefferson, in a passage running immediately after that, I think I have it in my book.
I've got it right here.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we can show the audience what ran right after that.
Yeah, right.
But it's not on the wall. If we let's look at this right here again, because we can see, you see the language that runs right afterwards is left out.
That's right.
Nor is it less certain that the two races equally free cannot live in the same government.
Yeah,
Native habit, opinion has draw indelible lines of distinction between them.
Yeah, that's right. His position was that, in theory at least, blacks should be freed, but as soon as they had been freed, they must be deported from the United States. That was his position. Throughout his life, he never changed it. And it is totally distorted by that representation in the monument.
How did you find that? How did you discover it?
I suspected it, and then I dug, and I found what it is.
Did you ask anybody at the memorial why this was done this way?
No.
Why do you think it was done this way, and how often are words of Jefferson juxtaposed like that?
Well, I mean, I think FDR, who was, like Jefferson himself, FDR was a master politician. And one of the things he needed to do was to hold the South for the Democratic Party and to hold on to Jefferson while insulating Jefferson, as far as the North was concerned, from the taint of a pro-slavery apologue. Was very good politics at the material time, and FDR played it. That's how he managed to stitch together those great majorities.
You know, there's a lot of other language around that memorial. Did you happen to check and see if anything else had been put out of context?
No, no, I didn't want to work on that, but it would be an interesting topic.
You say in here that Jefferson was demonstrably a racist. Those are the exact words.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. The whole idea in his writings, even when he's condemning slavery, he's also arguing, hey, maybe he studs his writings on the subject with maybe. What it all amounts to is, I'm not convinced that they are fully equal human beings. That's it. And with a good deal of implied kind of civilized regret that this should be, worry concerning it and so on. I find it a very unattractive performance, I must say, the whole thing. Everything he writes about blacks and race.
How many books like this have been written that you, when you did your research, had many taken this position like you have?
Books, no. Now there are. I think I cite in my last chapter, if I remember rightly, about 6 studies, 2 of which are long essays, 4 of which are books, some of them short. But they do break. I'm not claiming terrific originality for what I'm saying. I'm just bringing a lot of things together. And these studies are mainly of the 60s and early 70s. Do look hard, honestly, and well at the subject of Jefferson and race. And I cite these 6 works in my conclusions.
How did you go about writing this particular book?
Well, as I think I said, I started out. I started out as a Burkean, if you wish, and interested therefore in Burke on America, and which took up a lot of his first 15 years in politics. And his relations with America. And then I noted that that after that, whereas Burke had been among the most noted friends of America in Britain at the time, many people in America turned against him over the French Revolution. And I think I began with that discovery, if you like. And then, while I was on a research project here, thought that would be a good one to look at. Began by the founding fathers in general in relation to this, and then found Jefferson much the most interesting, much the most committed in favor of the French Revolution, and went on from then, and then became interested in the link between love of the French Revolution and defense of chattel slavery, which don't seem to be positions that on the surface go closely together, but did in Jefferson's life.
What's the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution?
Limits. The American Revolution was always, from the beginning, very like the English Whig Revolution. That's why it was okay. Our people have been intruding on our liberties. We need to defend our liberties against these intrusions, these innovations. We don't want them. But the French Revolution, from very early on, was concentrated on innovation. We are enlightened people. All this stuff, all the history that has preceded us is of tyranny and darkness and obscurantism, and we are going to break through into a new day. It was the utopian streak in the French Revolution which distinguished it from most of the American Revolution, but not from those American revolutionaries who, like Jefferson, thought that America could be done over all again through the inspiration of France, which was Jefferson's position from 1789 to 1794, after which it fades.
Where was he during that time?
During the first couple of months of the French Revolution, he was still in France. He was minister plenipotentiary of the American Republic in France. And then very early on, I think it's September 1789, 2 months after the French Revolution started, he was recalled at his own request to the United States, where he was then, when Washington then offered him the position of Secretary of State, which he rather reluctantly accepted, because it was, in terms of the regional divide, it was a dicey one, to be the leading Virginian in a government which was, to a large extent, dominated by the North.
You spent a lot of time suggesting that Thomas Jefferson got most of his information on the Revolution from the Marquis de Lafayette.
Yes.
And that was a skewed view?
Yes. You see, he wasn't for the French. He left America in September 1789. And bear in mind that the actual French Revolution, full-blown, only starts in July. So he didn't ever actually have much experience of the French Revolution. Didn't know much about it. But he had worked. Lafayette didn't expect anything like what the French Revolution actually turned out to be, as he found out when he was run out of the country. But Jefferson, on the whole, went along with Lafayette. He accepted Lafayette's interpretations of things, conveyed those back. As a diplomat, as a politician, I draw a distinction between Jefferson as a diplomat and as a politician. As a diplomat, it seems to me that his dispatches show him to be rather conventional, giving the interpretation of the leading group of the time, basically Lafayette's, which is everything, of course, going on to totally peaceful change and whatnot. But as a politician later on, when he goes back to America and is using the topic of the French Revolution within American politics, he uses it brilliantly for within Washington's first administration to undermine the Hamiltonians who were then dominant there. His brain is really working once he gets back to America. I find that in his French dispatches, his brain is in basically suspense. French affairs basically boredom when he's in France. But France as a topic in America, that's alive, and he comes alive.
Read you back a line that you wrote.
Okay.
Page 150. It is difficult to resist the conclusion that the 20th century statesman whom the Thomas Jefferson of January 1793 would have admired the most is Pol Pot.
That's right.
Who was Pol Pot, and why did you say that?
Pol Pot was the Indo-Chinese leader who practiced genocide on an enormous scale. And my reason for making the comparison is in the letter of Jefferson's, which includes the word, "My own affections have been deeply wounded by some of the martyrs to this cause." That's the French Revolution. "But rather than it should have failed, I would have seen half the earth desolated." And he goes on to embroider that sinister thought by saying that even if the whole population of, say, France, were reduced to only 2 people, a modern Adam and Eve, from whom a free stock could be regenerated, this would be okay. Everybody wiped out and it would be okay. Oh.
You also make a connection between Thomas Jefferson and Timothy McVeigh.
Yes, indeed.
The Oklahoma.
I think I quote some passages there, do I not?
You do.
Yes.
But you also say there's a T-shirt that they've kept under wraps that
yes.
suggests that he was a follower of Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, why would they be? Why would that Terry Nichols and that? What would be the motive?
No, the whole idea was what is Jeffersonian when we're speaking of the Jefferson of the French Revolution. That freedom is a self-evident absolute, and that any number of people can be killed for it. That text, which is quoted on the back of my book, is what links the cult of Jefferson to these particular revolutionaries, and the two who are the prime suspects in the Oklahoma murders, both quote Jefferson, that sentence of Jefferson. They are, to that extent, Jeffersonian.
By the way, who's William Short? Because that's who the letter went to.
William Short was at one time described by Thomas Jefferson as his adopted son. He succeeded Jefferson when Jefferson retired as minister plenipotentiary. He was not immediately replaced, but William Short took his place as charge d'affaires and was there through the ensuing stages of the French Revolution. Was initially, like Jefferson, a partisan of the French Revolution during the Lafayette phase. But after the fall of the king, on 10th of August, 1792, and the accelerated phase of the French Revolution that followed, with many executions, murders, and so on, William Short recoiled against the French Revolution. Jefferson did not immediately comment. He passed on his dispatches apparently to Washington. Washington was impressed, Jefferson was not, and the rift between Washington and Jefferson expands at this point.
You also talk about the image of Jefferson in this country, and you talk about Merrill Peterson's book. He's been a guest here on this program, The Image of Thomas Jefferson. Yeah. Why do people work so hard on the positive image of Thomas Jefferson?
I think it's an aspect of American civil religion that he is felt and has been felt over the years to be a potentially bonding force, including, and this I think was Roosevelt's idea in elevating him, as it were, within the pantheon. Potentially a bonding force between North and South, which he wasn't exactly during his lifetime, but okay. Looking back in that way, to bring him in was felt to be very important. And when Roosevelt was, if you like, bringing him in there and putting together the Rooseveltian coalition, it was possible to do the kind of distorting thing we saw there about what he actually said about race. Because the New Deal, after all, was a deal between northern and southern whites, primarily. And it worked. But to my mind, it cannot reasonably be sustained in modern times, considering what we know Jefferson's actual position was on racial matters, which is thoroughly racist.
Which of the founding fathers that you studied were not racist?
I would say Washington was not. Washington was stuck with being a slave owner. He emancipated all his slaves after his death. He never went in for rhetoric of any kind. He wasn't a great rhetoric man, as we know. A great soldier, also a great politician, and busy holding the United States together. Adams was anti-racist. Hamilton was anti-racist. Madison went along with Jefferson. Monroe went along with Jefferson. So you see the regional divide is, I think, very marked throughout.
Do you have any knowledge as why you got into this business in the first place?
No, I don't really.
What about your own family? What was it like?
Well, I was brought up in Ireland, and when we discussed politics at all, it was mainly Irish politics we were discussing. I didn't get into international politics until fairly middle life, when I worked for the United Nations.
How did you get into that, by the way?
How did I get into that? I suppose, well, I was in the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs, and when Ireland joined the UN, Ireland didn't join the UN immediately because Ireland was neutral during the war, and the neutrals were kept out by Soviet decision, basically. But when we were let in the 1950s, I was at that time Counselor of Embassy in Paris, and I was brought back to be head of a new UN division. In that capacity, I went out very often to the UN General Assembly. Dag Hammarskjöld, who was then Secretary General, got to know me, and when the Congo crisis broke out in early 1960s, and when it took a particular turn, he sent me out there to represent the UN in the Congo, and all kinds of other dreadful things happened, about which I wrote a book. To Katanga and back, and Hammarskjöld was killed, and I resigned from the UN to write a book about that experience. And went on from then. I suppose from the Congo experience, from that experience I had to think a lot about racial matters, a lot about what freedom is or might be, and so on. And when I retired from UN service, I wrote a book about that experience. And then I went ahead and writing and thinking more or less in the same area, including a lot. Freedom and color were associated for me because of the Congo experience. And I suppose that took me a long way in the direction of that book.
What party were you in Ireland?
I was in the Irish Labour Party. I was later, I was Minister for Communications in a coalition government which included Labour. And then, after I retired from that, I was editor-in-chief of the Observer newspaper in London. And then retired from that and became a private citizen.
Where did the name Cruz come from?
Well, I'm told it's of Anglo-French origin. La Croix is the roots. They used to pronounce the X. It starts somewhere in then, but that's a long time back.
You have a number of dedications here in the beginning of your book.
Yes.
Who are they?
Let me read them all.
You got Conor McDowell, Jonathan Waters,
yeah,
and Paris Young.
These are all three very young children, all born while this book was being written. Children of friends of mine. Conor McDowell's parents are living here in Washington. His father is correspondent here of Canadian Broadcasting. Jonathan Waters is his parents are blacks associated with the university in North Carolina, where I was. And Paris Young is the son of my research assistant for this particular book in Atlanta, Georgia. And the book is written in the hope that these young people of different hues and backgrounds and nationalities will someday meet and talk over these things. I think they will.
How hard is it for you to do the actual business of writing?
Not hard at all, only too easy. I mean, I like writing. I like the actual act of writing. I write columns for 2 Irish newspapers, and that is how I have earned my living for some years, writing mainly about political issues. Then.
Where do you write?
Where do I write? Wherever I am. Mainly at my home. I live on the Hill of Howth, which is a promontory near Dublin. We've lived there for the last 50 years. I like living there. I also like traveling. I like very much coming to this country. I'm very curious about this country, and those things are there.
What do you think of both Ireland and the United States today?
Very different things. In Ireland, let's look at Ireland a little first. In Ireland, the Republic of Ireland is more prosperous than it has ever been. It's at the moment among the more prosperous of the European nations, partly as a result of EEC membership, well used and rather sensibly used. But then there is this awful running sore of the relations between the Republic and Northern Ireland. To my mind, a major reason why this is a running sore is the refusal of political people in the Republic to respect the wish of a majority of people in Northern Ireland, quite a large majority, about 2/3, to remain in the United Kingdom. We keep stirring that up, and the stirring of it up by our political class encourages the IRA to stir up by murder, which they're still doing. And I have been opposing that. I've opposed it very strongly, to the extent recently of joining the United Kingdom Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, which is the smallest of the three Unionist parties, but very determined on the maintenance of the Union. And I found, okay, I've had a fairly good response to that on the whole, considering that it's a route, it would seem to traditional nationalists like my parents, grandparents, to be a rather outlandish thing to do. I found that I've had quite a lot of support for it.
What about the United States?
I'd rather learn more about the United States. When I come to the United States, I do come to learn and to listen. So I'm not at all a partisan in the politics of the United States. I simply hope they work out, mainly, as I think I said, for the investment that the rest of the world has in the future success and stability of this country, and the working out of race relations here interests me very much. And I don't know, and I don't want to lay down the law on those issues.
When you look at the scholarship that you went to prepare for this book, by the way, you had a senior research fellow at the National Humanities Center, Research Triangle, North Carolina.
Yes.
How did you get something like that? Where's that come from?
They just asked me to come.
You go down there and live?
Yes. We lived there for about a year and a half, and it's a marvelous place. And we got to know. There's a great atmosphere there. You get on with your work. You talk with other people who are interested in similar things.
What school?
Informal get-together.
Is there a school down there? I mean,
Yes. No. It's the National Humanities Center in North Carolina, but it has close relations with the three universities of the area. It's in Research Triangle Park.
University of North Carolina and Wake Forest, are those the three schools?
That's right, yes.
And
that's right.
You have a grant from the Lynn and Harry Bradley Foundation in Milwaukee.
Yes.
What's that all about? How's that work?
That grant was essentially got for me by the National Humanities Center. These are backers of theirs. They have angels, if you like, in the area, and they gave support for the research on which the book is based.
And this is the University of Chicago Press. Is that an organization you had a lot to do with?
Yeah, an earlier book of mine on Edmund Burke was published by them, and then, which is a hefty book, and then later a small book called Ancestral Voices about, essentially about Irish nationalism and Catholicism and the ways they interact. They published that about a year ago.
Which political group in this country would more than likely like Edmund Burke? Who quotes him?
Everybody quotes him basically because speechwriters find wanting a bit of moral or intellectual elevation for a speech, find Burke an okay guy to quote. Some of the quotes are things that he never said, invented by somebody else later, possibly an earlier speechwriter for a similar reason. But I don't find anybody much influenced, any modern politicians much influenced by Edmund Burke. They may be, I don't think so.
You point out that President Clinton's middle name is Jefferson.
Yes.
What significance do you see in that?
Well, I wonder a lot about that, actually, because I think he'll have to look again a bit at Jefferson. I'm indeed hoping somewhat that my book might have that effect, because I think, to my mind, if we're talking about a multiracial America, and surely the future of America has to be multiracial, this guy is a bad prophet for a multiracial America. That guy, yes. And I think Jefferson ought to see that. I mean, I think the present president ought to see that. He doesn't seem to. But let's see.
Well, if you were sitting in front of him right now, what are the things you'd tell him to watch out for in being an endorser of Thomas Jefferson?
I'd say, well, first of all, you should realize that this is a man who not merely said, but maintained throughout his life, and that there was no room for free blacks in America, that blacks would have to be deported. That's what he taught. And he drafted laws. For example, he was a draftsman of a law according to which a white woman who gave birth to a child of mixed race would be required to leave the state of Virginia, which was the area for which he was legislating at the time. And if she did not leave, then any Virginian who wished would have the right to take measures against her, kill her, and the offspring. Well, you can't maintain that. A person who could say that, who never basically withdrew from that position. You can't maintain him as an apostle and cult figure of a racially neutral America. You can't do it. It's not possible.
How did the two families live together when Thomas Jefferson had the slave family, the Sally Hemings family, and his own?
Well, he never married again. He had the two daughters who grew up. He maintained a very good relation with them. There's some evidence, but it's not conclusive, that the younger daughter may have been deeply disturbed by finding his liaison with Sally Hemings. She certainly tried to enter a convent around the period when she is likely to have found out about the liaison. He got her out of the convent and back to America, and then darkness falls on that particular scene. We don't know.
But how could you be a racist and then have a liaison with a black woman and have 4 children by her? How could you have...
That was normal. That was normal. You know, his own father-in-law had that. And nobody in the Virginian culture of the time kind of did anything. The women averted their eye. The men knew. Jefferson himself knew. It was normal to have a liaison with a black woman, children by a black woman. In Jefferson's case, He appears to have emancipated his own children by his will, but his grandchildren, within the same system, remain slaves subject to flogging and all the other dispensations of the slave system.
Julian Boyd, you mentioned quite a bit.
Yes.
Who was he?
Julian Boyd was the editor of most of the great series of Jefferson's correspondence. If I remember rightly, there are 27 volumes, I think, published. He edited 25 of them. And he was a most inspired editor, a brilliant editor. But for many of his years, he was also if you like, a Jeffersonian cultist. But the cult clearly is beginning to crack in the last 2 volumes of his series. He can't take it anymore, and that's it. But it's one of the great editions of all time. It's a work of loving scholarship, and he digs up things that he finds personally inconvenient, repulsive, wrestles with them, tries to do anything with them, but he doesn't eliminate the actual stuff. It is a really great edition.
Do you find yourself arguing with Jefferson scholars about all this?
No, well, I have. There were when this book was before coming to the publishers, when they were deciding whether to publish or not. They then submitted it to 2 Jefferson scholars, one of whom was enthusiastically for, the other equally enthusiastic against. Kill it, it's awful stuff. And then a third was brought in who said, it's okay, it ought to be published. And so it broke through. But there is, I would expect, we haven't any reviews in yet. I'm hoping they'll be in soon. But I would expect some Jefferson scholars to demur, possibly rather sharply. And I would like to debate with any of them who may wish to debate it with me.